Welcome to Soulful 7's special Christmas edition, and I have a very, very special guest today, Stauffer, who is technically my boss and has been for 13 years, but our relationship means so much more than that. So I count him as a very important friend in my life and a mentor. And I would say that probably the biggest things that I've done in the last 13 years is because of you. The first funeral I did was with you. You took me to the graveside the first time. I think that's right when I started the job at Woodmont.
Yeah, when we got lost on the way
and
to
we
the
got lost on the way to the
I
cemetery, which, and I was probably speeding.
Right. Yes,
Glad we
you
didn't
were.
get a ticket.
Yep, you were driving.
But truly, in my own personal life, professionally and spiritually, I would say I credit you for the growth. And, in some ways, I want to cuss you because you made me do some really hard things.
Right.
Funerals being, one of the most difficult things. But I speak all the time at church, and I would have told you 13 years ago that's probably wasn't something that I felt comfortable with, and now I do it all the time.
Right.
You have allowed me, encouraged me to write, and you the way you lead is you just trust us to kind of explore our own interests and passions, and so I've written 3 books under working with you. I've done this blog, Bread and Honey. I've started Soulful 7 Conversations, and you just continually support me. So I'm so grateful for that. But also, I just see you kind of as a spiritual mentor too, and I love you, Clay. I really appreciate you, and I feel like we both have had a really difficult last week.
Right.
And in some ways, though, just knowing you were there made it so much easier with the loss of Izzy. So,
well, you have many, many gifts, and I've always just tried to encourage you and challenge you to use them, just like with the other staff, and you do that well.
And you kind of you joke about me being late because I'm late. And here she is.
Yeah, you're running in the room. It's
running
okay.
in the room.
But
Yeah. How many times have I run into church and tripped and skinned my knees, elbows trying to get to church on time?
You have a lot of plates in the air.
I do. But anyway, this is like I said, this is the Christmas season, and so I just thought it was really important for us to talk about what that means, what that means to our faith. The relevance of Christmas right now and the culture and the world that we live in. And especially when we're both kind of in that place of grief, and so many people right now have arrived at Christmas, and they've either lost someone just recently, or they lost someone really important to them years ago, but it's still this brings it all up.
Right.
So we have a lot to talk about.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Let's get started.
Okay. Yeah. I love that I'm in charge.
Yeah, I know. I'll follow your lead.
You're going to follow my lead. Okay, so, I always start Soulful 7 questions just, with a pretty big question, but how do you know that God exists?
How do I know that God exists? So the easy questions first, huh?
Okay, yeah.
I believe that God exists because I experience God, but my understanding of God has changed and evolved over the years. But I can't imagine living a life where I didn't believe that God exists. But yet, in each stage of my life, I feel like my understanding grows deeper and deeper, and it's not the same today as it was 5 years ago, as it was 10 years ago. I believe that God exists because I experience God, I communicate with God, and then ultimately, which is a part of your Christmas question, I believe that God exists because of the person of Jesus Christ. So my theology has always been very Christocentric, influenced by guys like Karl Barth and Jürgen Moltmann, John Calvin. I believe that Jesus Christ is God incarnate, God in the flesh. And so for me, and for I think most Christians, Christ is the bridge between humans and God. And so everything that Christ represents, love and compassion and kindness, looking out for the least of these, I believe that that's what that's God's priority. That's what God is calling us to do, to be more loving, to love others as we love ourselves, to show compassion, to show mercy, to look out for the least of these. So all of that to say, I believe that God exists because I experience God, and then my relationship with God comes through Christ.
Okay, so give me some examples of ways that you've experienced God.
I would say there's lots of examples. Obviously, being out in nature, you go out west and you're in the mountains, or you go to the beach. Our family goes to the beach a lot, and you stand at the ocean and you just think, wow, this can't be by chance, right? The sunsets and just the beauty of creation. I would also say just by looking at other people and seeing that everybody is made in God's image, wonderfully and uniquely made. I just
look at you quoting Psalm 139. I love it.
I can't believe that it's all by chance. But there's still a lot of things that I don't understand. There's still a lot of things that don't make sense. You mentioned, we lost a close friend just a few days ago, last week, and why a young mother with 3 children and a great husband, why her life has to be cut off short. We can't make sense of that. And so the question that we all wrestle with, which is the question of why, is the question that Philip Yancey says will never go away. And it doesn't go away, and we wrestle with it. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to surrender my faith because I can't answer that question why.
Well, I can remember when my son Charlie was diagnosed with cancer, and our mutual friend Todd came to the house to baptize Charlie in our kitchen. And I just, remember being in such a state of really just complete and utter despair, and him saying, but what's the other choice? Do you really want to live a life where you don't believe in God?
That's right.
And what a scary place that is.
I can't imagine living a life without faith. I can't imagine just giving up on hope and giving up that things aren't going to get better and things aren't going to, even if it doesn't make sense to us. I can't imagine living without faith. And I've there's been times in my life when I've doubted, times in my life when I've wrestled, but I've never given up on faith and given up on believing in God.
And so what would you tell people, Clay? Because I think a lot of people we know right now that did love Izzy are probably having that moment of,
Sure.
What did St. John say? It's the dark night of the soul.
Sure.
Where this is really almost feels egregious that you would take
Sure.
such a beautiful light from the world.
Sure.
What would you tell people right now?
Well, first I would say you hug and surround the people that are around you that love you. And we all love Alex and the 3 children. And I would say that we're not going to get an adequate answer to the question other than what we know about cancer, that cells multiply. And Issy would be the first person who said, I didn't pay attention to my body. I didn't detect it early enough when she could have dealt with it early on, right? And so that was part of what she gave her life to. Once she knew that she's stage 4 and that things weren't looking good, she wanted other people to go to the doctor and pay attention. But I would tell the people that are grieving. First, I would say that Issy's now in a better place and she's at peace, and we're the ones left grieving because we miss her,
right.
And because we loved her, and so we're the ones that are hurting. But I think Issy is very much present this Christmas. I mean, she's spending her first Christmas in heaven, and so I think that what we have to remember, or what I would tell everybody, what I've reminded myself, and is that we're not promised tomorrow. We sometimes live life like we're going to be here forever. We take tomorrow and next week for granted, but we're not promised that. We don't know what life is going to bring. And so one of her messages, was just live every day,
Right.
and be present and be thankful.
Right.
And I think she did that, especially, this past year.
Right, for sure. So if you had to introduce God as you know God, how would you do that?
Well, for me, as a Christian, I would first say that I know God through the person of Jesus Christ. that for me, Jesus Christ is the human embodiment of God, God incarnate, God in human form. So I have to start with that, because without that, I feel like it's really difficult to start. But on top of that, I think that the Trinity, and I consider myself Trinitarian, the Trinity for me has always left room for the mystery of God. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That basically that God cannot be put into a box. God cannot be viewed as just this or just that. That it's in God that we live and move and have our being, as we read in Acts. And so I would say that to people that sometimes the problem is that our God is too small. We try to pigeonhole God. J.B. Phillips wrote that great book called Your God is Too Small. And I think sometimes we need to expand our understanding of God. It's in God that we live and move and have our being. There's nowhere where we can go where God isn't. So for me, I start with Christ, but then it goes from there. And it includes the Holy Spirit, which is the most neglected part of the Trinity.
Which I love the Holy Spirit, because I feel like the Holy Spirit is what works in you and works in me.
That's
and
right.
It is kind of that living hope that is in me, is the Holy Spirit. And it's what allows me to believe. It's what allows me to try to help people heal, give hope, is the Holy Spirit.
Well, and through the power of prayer, we believe that the Spirit is alive. And even though we can't explain exactly how prayer works, we do feel like when we pray, we know it makes a difference. Right. We know that something is going on.
Because I'm reading the Corrie ten Boom's memoir right now, and I think she was Dutch, and she and her family were Christian. They were Protestants, and they let Jews stay with them in their house and hid them, and then they got caught and they were put into the concentration camps, and she lost her sister. But one of the things I read last night actually is she said, "Is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire?"
Interesting.
Which I thought was so, because I think that, if I'm honest, I think prayer is probably more my spare tire.
Sure.
Especially in the busy life that I live. I feel like that really it should be my steering wheel, and I think that I put it back and it's the spare tire.
Well, and Sunday we lit the second candle on the Advent wreath, which is the candle for peace. And one of the things that I have really come to believe is that it's going to be hard to find peace in this world if you don't pray. And Jesus said, "My peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I don't give to you as the world gives." And I think that if we don't slow down, if we don't take the time to be still, to be quiet, to reflect, to pray, which means not just asking God for things, but also listening to what God has to say, because communication is a two-way street, then we're going to have a hard time finding peace. And so
especially that peace beyond understanding.
That peace that passes understanding. And I think that our culture, and I've talked about this a lot, but our culture celebrates busyness and multitasking. And we really, you see people, "How have you been? I'm so busy." And we kind of say, "Oh, that's great. You're doing a lot of things." But busyness does not lead to peace. And busyness all the time leads to not having peace all the time.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because I just had my best friend Anne from Birmingham just stayed with us, and she came into the house and she was just so peaceful, and she said, "Oh, I'm just having the calmest, most peaceful Christmas season." And I was like, well, good for you, because I'm having the exact opposite.
Yeah,
my Christmas feels a little nutty, and I was envious, because I would love to be the person that walks into a room and says, "Oh, I'm just so peaceful."
Right. But I think sometimes sometimes life makes things chaotic, when you have just so much going on. But other times we plan it that way, and we take on too much, and we overload to where we can't do everything. And then, we make ourselves miserable. We wear ourselves out. And then you get into conversations about self-care, especially in the ministry and other caring professions. How do you take care of yourself, excuse me, so that you have something to pour out to other people? And I've learned, kind of come to believe over time, that, self-care is not selfish, especially if you're in the caring profession, that if you don't have anything to pour out, if you don't fill your own cup, then you can't do ministry.
Which is across the board, though. That's like for parenting.
That's right.
That's for working in medicine. It's across the board, that if we don't take care of ourselves. But I think we feel selfish taking care of ourselves, or at least I do. I mean, I'm the last person that I take care of. And usually, I can go for a while on the highway and then I just, stop in my tracks.
Well, I've had to work hard over the years to find a rhythm, when it comes to preaching, to find a rhythm when it comes to, to counseling and how many appointments can you take on, to find a rhythm when it comes to writing, to build my schedule in a way where I have built-in time to recharge, to rest, to read, when you preach and teach and write for a living, you have to read constantly, or you won't have any material. And so if you're too busy to do that, then that's going to be a problem.
It does. It limits your creativity.
That's right.
Sure.
But it also, nurturing your own soul. How can you talk to other people about caring for the soul if you don't care for your soul? Eugene Peterson, who passed away not too long ago, said, he once said, I don't want a busy pastor. He said, I want a pastor who knows how to care for his or her soul. Right. Because why do I want somebody who's stressed out and busy all the time telling me how to care for my soul when they're not doing the same thing? Right. And so I think sometimes we forget that. And so boundaries are important, and saying no is important, and prioritizing is important. If you can't get to everything, then what are the most important things to get to in a given day? Right.
Okay, so you just mentioned the soul, and the soul is something that I'm very interested in, especially being in the ministry, and especially, walking with people, when the body proves fragile, right? When there are, the passing of life, right? And so the soul to me is the part of us that I want to believe lives forever, right. And it's the part of us that is God in us, and it's the best in us, right? And so I want to believe, really want to believe that part of me, and not in a selfish way like Farrell should live forever, right? But that part of me that is of God, that would in some way, and I don't know what that will look like. I don't know what heaven will look like, what that next part of the journey. But I'm just curious, like when you think about the soul, what does that mean to you? So you and I have both been with people before when they passed, and I'll never ever get used to being with somebody, who's there, in their body one minute, and the next minute their body's there, but they're not there. Right. And I'm convinced that the soul lives on, that the soul moves to another realm, that the soul goes to heaven. I mean, I'm convinced that we shed our bodies. More and more people are being cremated now because the body is just it's an earthly vessel, and most of the times when life is over, it's good riddance, and the soul moves on. And so I believe that the soul moves on, and that it goes on to that next realm. And the only people that have really kind of given an account for that are people that have had these near-death experiences or written about them. They start the transition. They see themselves on the operating table, but there is some kind of a transition that happens. Right. And those of us that are still on this side of death are still, we still wonder what it will be like. But I do believe that the soul moves on and the body stays behind. And for people who've had cancer or terrible diseases or, physical abnormalities, then, good riddance to the body, and the soul moves on and goes to that next realm. But trying to explain that on this side of death is really difficult. I think it was Einstein that said that it's impossible for the human mind to conceive what eternity is. Right? And so it's that same idea that we use the word eternity, but we actually cannot process what that means. Yeah. And it's the same thing, I guess, a little bit with the soul, other than there are times, and, I think about Izzy's life, I think of what you do in the ministry, I think of just looking at one of my children, where it's just so clear that there's a part of us that is of God. Right. There is a part of us that is so beautiful, so perfect, so redemptive, so transcendent that you just know that there is something more about us.
That's right.
And I'm holding to it.
That's right.
I'm holding to it.
And you should. I mean, Paul says, now we see in a mirror dimly, then we will see face to face, and And so it's, we're, that phrase that people have said that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Meister Eckhart, I love that. Yeah.
And that's, that's getting to the heart of the soul and what the soul is.
Right.
But what's interesting is that a lot of people don't believe, or at least don't act in a way as though they feel it's important to take care of the soul, to nurture the soul. And when we are living in this world, that, your body and soul are still together. And so you also have to take care of the body. You can't be exhausted. You can't be worn out, and those two things go together in this life.
Eat hard, healthy food.
Yeah, exactly.
Exercise.
Right. That's
like
right.
all these
That's
things.
right. Oh, exactly. Yeah. We're not going to talk about food.
Okay.
We'll save that for another.
I know Clay doesn't like my green drinks and my salads.
Pharaoh likes food that keeps you hungry, and you leave going, okay, now where are we really going to go eat lunch?
Clay,
Right.
you're so bad. You're so bad. With that said, though, if you were to have the opportunity, that we will probably have the opportunity, Paul says that one day we will see God face to face.
Right.
What would you ask God? What would you say to God?
I guess the most obvious question that comes to mind is the question, that we wrestle with so much on earth, and that is why, right? This question of why do certain things have to happen, but on top of that, I guess I might say, well, why and how were we supposed to make sense of it when we were humans?
Right.
Because we couldn't come up with any answers that were adequate. And maybe then it'll all be crystal clear to us.
And we'll be like, goodness gracious,
Right.
Pharaoh, what a knucklehead you were.
But right now, we don't understand. And right now, we wrestle with those questions of why.
So, Clay, why do you think we're here? I mean, do you think there is this master plan, and when God gave us the first breath, marked us as belonging to him, said that we're made in his image, that we each have this mission, that we are part of this unfolding story, we have a job to do here?
Well, you've heard that quote that there's the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you figure out why. And some people live their entire life and they never figure out why they're here. So I think that there's lots of answers to that question, but I do think that everybody needs to wrestle with that question.
How do we figure out why we're here?
Well, last night,
what we're supposed to do here.
Last night at the lecture with Robert George and Cornel West, the question of vocation came up. And vocation is very different from job. It's very different from, what you want to do. Vocation is, what is your calling? What is your passion? And then how do you align that with being in the world? And ultimately, they lifted up service. We're here to serve, serve other people. Jesus would say we're here to love God and love our neighbor. Right. We're here to live out the golden rule. We're here to leave the world better than we found it. I think that, there's the quote, identify what makes you come alive and then go and do that, because what the world needs, that's Thurman, right? What the world needs are more people who've come alive and they're tied into what they're called to do, right? And yet what's interesting is we now live in a time where so many people are lonely, they're confused, they're empty, they don't have meaning, and so the last thing on their mind is what am I here to do? They don't know the answer to that question. I do think that as human beings, we are social creatures. So one of the things that we're called to do is connect with people. Yeah, that I'll go back to Jonathan Haidt gives those three kind of definitions of happiness. Happiness comes from getting and consuming. Happiness comes from within, the Buddhist approach. But then he says, ultimately, no, both of those are inadequate. Happiness comes from between. It comes from connection. It comes from networks. It comes from the life that you build with other people and the meaning that comes from your relationships, right? So that's one thing I think about, I think about our friend Issy, is she was really, really good at building relationships, and she made the effort to get to know people, and a lot of people forget to do that. They forget that if you want to have friends in life, you got to go be a friend. You got to actually get outside of yourself and go check on and see how other people are doing, right? And so I think those are some of the answers, but some people never figure it out.
And what would your advice be for someone that is getting ready to go into 2020 and they do feel kind of stuck, and they do feel like maybe they're feeling a little ragged. They don't feel like their job is a vocation.
Right.
That they're struggling to feel like they are contributing some way in a bigger way in the world.
Well, I think that I've always been a big fan of resolutions or New Year's goals, because I think the new year is always a time to kind of recalibrate and to say, okay, what do I want to do this year? You know, we do that as a church, and I think people should do it in their own lives. But I think
and marriages too, I think.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think a lot of marriages get put on cruise control, especially when kids come into the picture, right? I mean, you and I see that all the time, that people have been married and it seems like they have a great marriage, but all their time and energy has gone into raising the kids, and they didn't make each other a priority, and they're just kind of coexisting. And so I think the new year is a time to say, okay, what are my priorities going to be in 2020? And, you know, I like the number 3. It's a good number. So what are the 3 most important things in my life that I'm going to focus on? And then how am I going to make sure that my time and my energy aligns with those priorities?
Right.
I mean, that's the law. You know, John Maxwell's had a big impact on me. The law of priorities. You know, are you allocating your time to the things that you say are most important? Many of us say, here's what's important to me, but then when you look at our time and our money and our energy, it doesn't align with the priorities. And that's unfortunate. So I don't know.
I mean, I just feel like life is so short. We are getting older.
Sure.
We can't reel it back, and we don't know how many days, weeks, months, years that we have ahead of us. So it is this sense of intentionality of saying, you know, this is really what does make me feel good. This is where I feel like I am making a difference.
Right.
And I also would say to that, you know, this is countercultural, but I think less is more.
That's right.
You know, I think that, and you'll be the first to say that I'm not good at that. Yeah. I'm usually the one that says yes. And I know. So 2020, I think that's probably one of the things I should be more intentional about is less is more. And where do I want to make a significant contribution? Where do I want people to feel my presence? Yeah. And in a good way? Of course, that's children for both of us, because we both have big families.
Right. I think, you know, I mean, you know, for me, it's always, it's faith, family, friends. And you and I are fortunate to where our work and our faith intertwine. Right. Now, the ministry is not always spiritual.
Yeah, sometimes that makes it more difficult.
Yeah, it can be very taxing and very exhausting, right?
Yes.
But naming the things that are most important in our life, and then making sure that we are living those out, and actually putting them in order. If we say it's faith, family, and friends, and what are we doing to grow in our faith? What are we doing to spend intentional time with our children? Right. What are we doing to nurture the existing friendships that we have, and also to make new friends? And sometimes I think we take all of those things for granted. We take our faith for granted. We take our family for granted. We take our friends for granted, and we got to stop doing that. But I also think we have to, one of the concepts of less is more is that we have to cut ourselves some slack and not put so much pressure on ourselves to do everything. Right. You know, I mean, I think.
But we live in an Instagram world where everything, you are supposed to live this perfect, beautiful, life all the time.
Well, and
it's just so not real.
You know how I feel about social media, right?
I mean, I'm kind of with you on social media. I pop in and I pop out.
Right.
Because I do think, there's so many podcasts that I love, and I think there are some good things about it. But
there's so many, it helps you keep up with people, right? But it also, everybody's putting their best out there, and it looks like everybody's life is so glamorous. I think about it, it's kind of like Christmas cards you get, right? I love, one of my favorite top parts of Christmas is getting Christmas cards in the mail, because Megan and I, between the two of us, have lived a lot of different places and gone to graduate school and lived in different parts of the country. So you get all of these cards in, and you see people at the beach, and you see them in the mountains, and you see them so happy. But what those Christmas cards don't talk about are the things that have happened throughout the year that have been incredibly difficult. Right. The painful divorce, the loss of a friend, a miscarriage, the financial hardships, you just see the good. And that's kind of like social media. Nobody really posts, hey, I'm really having a horrible week right now. They say, look at my family. And so I think that we just have to be realistic and know that life is not perfect. Right. And people do struggle. And that question of, is there more happiness and joy in life than sadness? I'd like to think so. But there's certainly times for people when they don't think so. And some people have to suffer way more than their fair share.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so do you have any absolute truths that ground you, that are, as Tillich says, is the grounding of your being,
Sure.
that you just know these are the pillars that keep me standing and allow me to be, a strong and faithful person in the world? What would those be?
Well, so you've heard me over the years. I preach a sermon in January that's kind of called "This I Believe," and it's my core beliefs. And so for me, I would go back to that. I believe in God, Father Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth. I believe in love. I believe that ultimately we're here to love, to give love and receive love. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in marriage, home, and family life. And I think one of the most unfortunate things about our culture is that is the breakdown of the family on multiple socioeconomic levels, not just in one part, has really made life challenging for many people. Mm-hmm. And so I believe in the importance of marriage, home, and family life. I believe parents have one of the most important roles to play when it comes to preparing their children. I believe in the golden rule. It's such a basic teaching, but it's, if you take Jesus's, love God and love your neighbor as yourself, and then he says in the Sermon on the Mount, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, some people would be dumbfounded to experience their actions or their words that they put towards other people. Right. And so I think that the golden rule is a great way to live life. So those are a few things. I do believe in the power of prayer. I also believe in free will. I don't believe that we're puppets. I do think God gives us opportunities, and there are definitely God moments that align in life, but I believe that we are participating in the unfolding narrative of life, and we make decisions, some good decisions, some bad decisions, and I'm also convinced that we miss opportunities that are right in front of us that we're too busy or stressed or worried to take advantage of them. So I believe in free will too.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. The missing God, though, I think that in the culture that we live in right now, I think so many people are like, spirituality, people aren't as spiritual, people aren't going to church, and I think it's because people have they've followed the tidal wave of culture.
Sure.
And so, which tells us to, be, do, accumulate more and more. Right. And we've talked about the busyness. And so I think we do. I think if we would slow down and be more aware, I think God is speaking to us. Mm-hmm. I think I miss it all the time. Well, I'm just such a knucklehead. I think I miss it.
I think we all miss it. I think it's part of being human. It's part of, being busy and attending to all the responsibilities that we have. But we need to, a problem we have in Western culture is we are not present.
Right.
We are doers, we are achievers, we have lists, right? And so we don't stop long enough to be present. And frankly, some people don't want to because they have to sit and be still with their own thoughts and their own feelings, and that terrifies them. Right. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem as well.
And I think that's the thing in our culture. You're supposed to always be relevant, and so that idea of stopping, taking time. So to segue into Christmas, one of the things that has spoken to me this season is each of the main characters in the Christian narrative, they actually did stop and they noticed. And I think they could have very easily not noticed, the star, the angel Gabriel, the interaction of the different people, whether it's the innkeeper or it's the menagerie of animals or it's the angels in the sky for the shepherds. Whatever happened over 2,000 years ago, those key people in the story, they stopped. And they noticed. Right. And then after they noticed and they were blown away, like, oh my goodness, God is actually speaking and has his hand in this story, they then acted. Right. And it changed their life forever.
Well, and like Matthew's gospel, there's two basic accounts of the birth narrative. There's Matthew and there's Luke, and then God. John has a beautiful narrative of the incarnation, but Matthew says that the wise men, after they came to Bethlehem and they saw the baby, that they went home by another road. And so depending on how you want to read the Bible, they might have just gone home a different way because they didn't want Herod to find them. But they also were changed, and they changed their life. And I think kind of going back to the New Year's question, I mean, Christmas should not leave us the same, even though we celebrate it every year. It should change us. We need to start 2020, by another road. Not that we, can everything that we've done, but we need to do new things and try new things and cut out some old things. And so, change in life is healthy. It's good. They went home by another road. And that means that they weren't the same after they encountered the Christ child.
Yeah, and I think we have to, we have to be unselfish, and we have to be vulnerable, and we have to believe. Those three things. We have to encounter some sort of divine presence, in our lives, and then that changes. Because I do think you can run right through Christmas.
Oh, sure.
And actually, if I confess, I think there have been Christmases that I have run right through it.
Yeah.
And this Christmas feels very poignant to me, and it feels especially tender, because Izzy kind of is that Christmas star telling us, whoa.
Sure.
You get this one beautiful life.
Right.
And I promise you God is there. So honor the life and honor God and live it in a beautiful, worthy way.
Yeah, Christmas is about, hope, peace, joy, and love. But the irony is we fill our calendars, we fill our schedules, we have all these things to do that by the time Christmas actually gets here, we're so exhausted. And we missed it.
We missed it.
We absolutely
I know. I
missed
think
it.
it's why on December 26th, everybody has this complete
Right. That's right.
Whereas actually, what we should be feeling on the 26th is elated.
Right.
We should be like, oh my gosh, it's like I have all this. Nothing is impossible with God, and I have all this in front of me, that all these possibilities.
Yeah, and we feel worn out and exhausted. Especially if you work in the church, you are worn out and you're exhausted because it's been really busy. But I think that we don't slow down to just take it all in. One of the best walk through Bethlehem's. One year it was snowing and the crowd was like half the crowd, which people might want to argue over how many people came through Walk Through Bethlehem. The answer for me is the same: thousands. Don't argue over it. But this one year it was snowing and the crowd was really small. And I remember just walking out in the stable and seeing the snow fall everywhere. And that was an incredibly peaceful moment. And we don't have many moments like that. Right.
Maybe that's actually the message today, Clay, is that what we should be searching for is, where can we find those peaceful moments?
Well, I think
so. What does that look like?
You have to find them along the way. You can't put it off until after I get all of these things done, then I'll have it. No, you have to find it along the way. If you don't have peace in your life now, then you're not going to have it in a couple of weeks or next year. So you have to find it along the way. And it also, I believe, it's a decision that you make.
Right.
Where you say, I'm going to find inner peace, and I'm not going to let other people or other situations take it away from me.
Right.
And so when Jesus said, he said, my peace I'll leave with you, my peace I give to you, I do not give to you as the world gives. I think he was saying the world cannot and will not give you peace.
Right.
So you have to get it on your own.
You have to find it.
And you cannot sit around and wait for somebody else or some circumstance to align for you to have peace. You have to make a decision to cultivate it in your own heart.
Right.
And many people don't do that.
Right. It's so true. It's so true. It's I don't know. It's like two different ways of living. So you either live that peaceful path, and which you do. It's an intentionality thing. It isn't. I wish I could say, especially in the life I live with 6 children and writing and ministry and all those things, that it isn't. I can't just snap my fingers either, and it happened. For me, I go to the woods. That's my. I have to. I like Jesus. I have to actually extricate myself from my life.
Right. Get away.
Or it doesn't. It's very difficult for me to have it happen in the topsy-turviness of my life. So I have to intentionally step away.
And if you read the Gospels, you can see how many times Jesus did that. He was doing that all the time. He went to the mountain. He went to the wilderness. He went away. That's how he started his ministry. And so there's something to be said about that, because it's really hard to find that calm in the midst of chaos. peace in the midst of the stress, right? Because you can't always escape. I mean, escaping is good and getting away is good, but sometimes you can't do that.
Right.
And so if you can't center yourself and pray or read scripture or, for some people do yoga, you have to find ways to do it in the midst of your life.
Right.
And some people
do that well. What are the ways that
well.
you do it, Clay?
So I do it a number of ways. I would say I love to read, and so
What are you reading right now?
Oh, a lot. Well, right now I'm reading a bunch of papers from Vanderbilt students.
That's right, because you're a professor at Vanderbilt right now.
I taught this fall, so right now I'm reading their papers and trying to get grades out.
Well, that's not peaceful.
Yeah, but it's enjoyable. I've been reading a number of different books. I've been going back. I was looking at N.T. Wright's Simply Jesus. Last night at the lecture, I picked up a couple of copies of books by Robert George, so I was starting into one of those.
Okay.
I've also, it's hard when you I have this huge stack, and when you actually think about it, Henry Nouwen's book Peace Work is not a very thick book, but it's a great book about how we work, how we do this. I mean, he actually talks about here's what you can do to find peace in your life, and then by the way, here are the things that where you can't find peace.
Right.
This Sunday, I'm going to preach on joy, and I love that book by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu.
Book of Joy is my favorite.
The Book of Joy, and they say here are the things that keep us from joy, and here are the things where we find joy, and we need to constantly be reminded of those two lists. So I'll be looking at that book before the sermon on Sunday. Stanley Hauerwas.
I was going to look at that book too.
Well, that's fine. You can do that. Stanley Hauerwas is The Peaceable Kingdom. I love that. It's a Christian ethics book. So I'm always reading multiple. But right now I'm grading undergraduate papers.
Okay.
So that'll be over soon.
So Clay, is there a particular character in the Christmas story this year or universally that especially speaks to you? Well, I'll tell you mine.
Yeah, tell me yours, because
Okay,
you've obviously you've been thinking about that.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious for me. It's Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So, I find, I love a strong female,
mm-hmm.
and a strong female that is brave
mm-hmm.
and courageous,
mm-hmm.
and does things beyond what she thought she was capable of,
mm-hmm.
but also contributes in such a profound way that's larger than herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what Mary did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly thinking about Mary because, I just think that God is constantly asking me, come on, Farrell, will you do this
mm-hmm.
for me? And this person needs you, be me in the world in some ways,
right.
Please give people hope, give people love. And I feel like Mary, she said yes to
right.
God, you know, and I worry because I think that I probably say no more than I say yes to God.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's selfishness, busyness, a lack of faith,
mm-hmm.
That I don't say it enough. And so Mary consistently speaks to me.
Sure.
It's this constant inner Farrell, come on, nudging me.
Sure.
Say yes,
sure.
For God, be put yourself out there.
Right. That's why you wrote that piece where you said if you could interview somebody, you'd love to interview Mary.
I'd love to interview Mary,
what was going through her mind and how she felt and what was happening. I mean, I was actually thinking about I wonder what was going through Joseph's mind mm-hmm. as he was taking all of this in, right? He must have been scared. He must have been confused. But then I think about the wise men, and I think about these men, the Magi, who very affluent, very comfortable, and yet they traveled this really long way to go and see the Christ child, right? And then after they did that, their life wasn't the same. And I think sometimes God is calling us to go, travel, go to a new place, a different place. And once we do that, then our life is not the same. Some people have a hard time thinking of their life being any other way than it is right now.
Right.
And sometimes God is calling us to make changes. And it may not be like complete change, but to change this or that, and then sometimes changes come and we didn't ask for them and we have to adjust to them. And so I think about the wise man and wise men. So that's probably, Yeah, that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because, your life, the wise men's lives were changed. So were all the other characters in the story, all of them, because they said yes, their lives were changed.
Sure.
And I was talking to a friend who's going through a divorce, a difficult divorce right now. And this will be her first Christmas where, they have to change between the two parents and everything. And I said to her, you have to believe though, that the best hasn't even happened yet.
That's right.
That's what God's promise is to us. Like, hold on, because, I've got this life in front of you. And if you keep believing, really beautiful things can happen in your life.
Well, and I think that's where, faith and hope come in. I look, faith and hope are, to me, kind of this two sides of the same coin. You can't have faith without hope. You can't have hope without faith. But people have to believe that things are going to be better.
Right.
That the pain is not going to last forever. Right. That time does heal wounds. And when things are new and they're raw, sometimes you'll say that to people and they can't hear you.
Right.
But you say you've got to keep going. You've got to just trust that it's not going to be this way forever.
Yeah, because God promises that He's going to consistently be renewing things.
Well, that's right. And I think we talk about Christmas, and so Christmas it's fun and it's parties and it's connecting and it's being with children and it's the excitement of Santa Claus and the elf on the shelf and all that stuff. But for a lot of people, Christmas is painful because they've either lost somebody that they loved, or they're going through a divorce, or they might just be reminiscing and thinking back to the way life used to be.
Right.
And so Christmas is a reminder to them that, they miss the way life used to be. They miss when their spouse was alive, or they miss when their children were little, or they miss when, just fill in the blank. And so I think that Christmas is this amazing time, but there's a lot of mixed emotions that happen during Christmas. Right. And so, one of my favorite things to do, you ask about finding peace. I like to sit, usually after the kids are asleep, Megan and I will sit in the den with the tree on and the lights on, and we might be reading or just talking, listen to Christmas music and just kind of be present in the moment and hear those carols that really never grow old, and just be present.
Yeah.
And just be present. Yeah. Find those pockets of peace that seem fleeting, but they're there.
Right. So Clay, that I've been doing this, what it looks like to live the soulful life, and how we can be more intentional of living, our day-to-day experience, it being more sacred and more meaningful and full. And so what does that mean to you? Like, what does it mean to live the soulful life?
I guess you call it the soulful life. I tend to use the language, the spiritual life. I think it's the same thing. I think that it means that we do what Jesus told us to do, and we pay attention to the condition of our heart. So all of Jesus's teachings, specifically the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard it was said this, but I actually tell you this. He's focusing on the state of our heart, our motives, right? And so I think that living the soulful life, living the spiritual life, is paying attention to the state of your heart, your motivations for why you do the things that you do. And then ultimately, I think the litmus test is Galatians 5:22, where Paul says, to bear good fruit, the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So the soulful
maybe
life,
that should be our
the list,
2020 resolutions.
Sure.
Just put those down as, I doing those?
But some people are, as you know, we all have one or two on that list at any given time that we need to work on. Right. And so I like to think of, you go into 2020 and you say, okay, what are the two fruits of the Spirit that I really need more of in my life? And then you make that a priority, because thinking about focusing on all of them is a little bit overwhelming. But we all have one or two that we really need to hone in on. So
to go step back, how would you define faith? Because that's one of the things. It's a leap of faith to believe in the Christmas story.
Sure.
There's a lot of the miraculous. We have a big old star. We have angels. We have the angel Gabriel come into Mary. We have a baby, born by the Holy Spirit. There's just there's a leap here. So which would be faith. We're taking in faith that God has unfolded this story of hope for us.
That's right.
So what if you had to define what that means to have faith?
So I like the definition in Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And that's where I think, faith and hope can often be interchangeable, right? But I think that, having faith, especially in this kind of post-enlightenment, very scientific world, it basically means accepting the fact that we can't explain everything. And sometimes we just need to stop trying. Now, I'm all for an intellectual faith that is consistent with science and research and all of that. But there comes a point in time when you can't explain everything.
Right.
And even physicians and scientists will say that can only get you so far before you have to take that leap, right? So I think living in faith means that you accept things knowing that you can't explain them all. I also think that a big part of living in faith means that you learn to trust in God. And we talk a lot about trusting in God, but we often don't do that. We act like we're in control of everything, and then if we can't control it, then we worry about it. And at some point, we have to just take a step back and trust in God. And that's hard. I think that's really hard for educated, high-achieving, affluent people, because they're used to controlling so many things in their careers and their families, and so admitting that there are things we don't have control over. In fact, there's probably more things that we don't have control over than we do. That really requires taking a huge leap. And so I think that a big part of faith is trusting in God. And then you've heard me say this. I've always said that faith is not, because you have faith, it doesn't mean that life is going to work out the way you want it to. It's just not. We all know that, right? But it does mean that no matter what happens in life, that you're going to be okay, that God's going to take care of you, that you're going to get through. And the only way you really know that is when you look back on your life and you look at situations when you were devastated or broken or lost or felt like you were at the end of your rope, and you realize that God, with the help of other people and perhaps even through other people, carried you through it.
Right.
And so a big part of faith is saying that even though life doesn't pan out the way that I had envisioned or I have in mind, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, God says all will be well.
All will be well.
Right.
That's right. And I think sometimes we behave as though all will not be well because we're so afraid of what might what could happen.
Right.
And we have to trust more. We have to understand that lots of things come our way, and it may not be what we want or what we plan, but it's going to be okay. And God will take care of us.
Clay, yes, say it again. That's what we need to all hear. I mean, I feel like so far, it's this idea of us just finding the peace, and maybe that finding the peace, it's not going to happen unless we do trust.
That's right.
Right? And I think you're right when you say, I think it is against the fiber of our humanity to trust what we cannot see, what we cannot prove, what we cannot just know definitively is going to happen.
Right.
And the reality is that we don't know what's going to happen when you leave my house today.
Sure.
Right? I mean, every day, every minute, every step really is a mystery.
Well, and that goes back to not taking another day for granted, to not pretending like we're going to be here forever. Right. Not putting things off because you think you'll always have a ton of time, to do it. I mean, seizing the moment, living in the present, and not acting like you'll be here forever because you just don't know. Well,
and we did the lecture together with AJ Levine, and where she talked about the Jesus's prayer, and she says, but basically what I think Jesus is saying in the Lord's Prayer is you should live as if today is your last day.
Right.
And if you actually live as if today is your last day, then you're living.
Well, and that's
this is it.
And that's what Jesus said in the worry passage in the Sermon on the Mount. Could any of you by worrying add a single hour to your span of life. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will bring troubles of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. So live life one day at a time. Deal with the things that you have on your plate today. Be present with the people that you're around today. Love your children today. Take care of yourself today. Check on other people today. And that's all you can do. I mean, that's all you can do. And we can worry, and we can get anxious, and we can fret, but it doesn't accomplish anything.
No, it doesn't. It actually diminishes us.
That's right.
Right?
Well,
it dims our light.
It wears us out.
It does. It wears our light, and we're lesser versions of ourselves when we're caught in that tangle of worrying.
Well, and
even though I'm worrying like crazy about teenagers right now, but
that's right. As your kids get older, you still worry. It's just a different kind of worry, right? I mean, you always worry about your children. You always worry about the things in life that you care about the most.
I know.
So you worry about your children. You worry about your health. You worry about your job or your friends, because those are the things that matter. I mean, we're not going to worry about things that aren't important to us. So, you could even argue that we worry because there are things that matter, and we're afraid of losing them, or we're afraid of having something happen to them.
Right.
But at the end of the day, just because you love your children, you don't lock them up in your house and never let them go out. They have to go live their lives.
Some Friday nights I do.
Well, that's right. That could be smart, but for the most part, they have to go out and live their lives. They have to go out and make their own decisions, especially as they get older. And what you just, you pray that you've raised them in a way to where they're going to make good decisions and things are going to be okay.
Right. Yeah, I find myself saying, and maybe this is a prayer, God, I want to trust you, instead of saying, I'm going to trust you. Right? So I feel like I live on that edge of, I want to trust you, God. I really do. Like every fiber cell of my being wants to trust you. And, so often though, I just hold back just that little bit instead of just completely surrendering, saying, I'm just going to trust you with this.
Right.
I mean, I'm worried about, saying something for Izzy for the funeral on Thursday. And at some point, I'm just going to have to say, God, I got to trust you to speak through me. It's the same thing with parenting. It's the same thing in my marriage. It's the same thing about, our parents and wanting them to be healthy and here forever. And all of those things that I have to make that leap and just say, okay, I'm going to trust you.
But again,
I'm going to trust you.
But it goes back to when something bad happens, you realize that it's not easy to get through, but you can make it through it.
I know.
And that's, but I think we kind of live in this age where, parents will do everything they can to keep their kids from failing, to keep their kids from experiencing pain. And that's just not realistic.
Right.
Pain is a part of life. Struggle is a part of life. Fear is a part of life. And so we have to learn to live with all those things. And then we have to trust that if things happen that we don't want, that it's going to be okay.
And God will see us through.
God will see us through, and God will give us the strength. And the question you'll get from people, especially people who they don't have faith, they'll say, where's your God when this happened? Where's your God? Why would God take a young mother with 3 kids? Why would God cause this car to go off the cliff? Why, those are the questions that people want to throw at people of faith. It's the theodicy question. If God is all loving and all powerful and omnipotent, then why do all these terrible things happen? And, and again, we never get satisfactory answers, but the only answer that I can come up with is God does not control everything, because God loves the creation. And when you love something, you don't control it. Right. You love your children, so you don't control their every move and action. You let them live their life. Well, we have free will. God lets us live our lives, and God has to operate by the same rules. God hopes we will make good decisions. God hopes that we will love each other. God hopes that we will support each other, but we can choose the opposite.
Right.
And bad things can happen. The gravity that keeps us tied to the earth also leads to car wrecks. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
And so I think that we don't get the answers that we want, and sometimes we don't even get the answers that satisfy. But we have to trust that life's going to be okay. And we're
And
going
I
to get
think
through
that's why there is relevance to the Christmas story, because it's human beings, ordinary human beings like me and you,
Right.
who did it. I mean, they trusted.
it. Right.
So they just, without faith, they just decided, you know what? I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust God, and I'm just going to see where that leads me. And I think we all could do better at that.
Well, but what also makes Christmas so amazing is that we know the rest of the story too.
Right.
We know that baby that was born in Bethlehem grew up, and he became, not only a moral teacher, but a healer. He did miracles, and then ultimately, he was executed and resurrected. And so we're also looking at the Christmas story through the hindsight lens of what happened after that. And so the reason that Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior of the world, is because he offers to the world what the world needs more than anything, including faith in life after death, that death to this life is not the end. But just as importantly as that, he offers us life before death, that we can bring the kingdom of God to earth as it is in heaven, that we can love other people the way that we want to be loved, that we can show mercy to people that are struggling, that don't have food, that don't have shelter, that don't have clothing, that we can be ambassadors of hope for people that are struggling. I mean, that's the promise, and so we look at the Christmas story through the rest of Jesus's life, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Right. So true. Okay, so I end every conversation, which I cannot believe we're ending, because I could talk to you forever. But hope is what it's all about for me, and I just want to always have hope. It's the great fear that you'll find yourself in a place where you don't, and so I just am consistently just really, really trying to find the hope, and then also give the hope. What is your definition of hope?
My definition of hope is tied into my definition of faith. But my definition of hope is that we don't ever get to a place where we just look backwards, but we're always looking forward, and we learn from the past, and we grieve the past, and we change from it, but we always have hope that things are going to be better, that things don't have to be the same. And so for me, hope is a matter of looking forward, and it means you have a positive perspective. I mean, you've heard me say, and you believe the same thing, that the world is so full of cynical and negative people, and there's so many critics, and there's so many people that will always tell you why you can't do something and what's wrong with this or that. And so what the world needs are people that are full of hope, that radiate warmth and energy to other people, which is one of your true gifts. That is what it means to live in hope. To live as though things can always be better, and that pain doesn't last, and that death doesn't have the final say, and that
love prevails. And that
love prevails. That's right. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas. I mean, you think about the hymns that we sing, Mild He lays his glory by, born that we no more may die, born to raise us from the earth, born to give us second birth. We sing these hymns like they're just old hat, but the lyrics are amazing when you actually read them. And so Christmas is a time where, we are called to believe that God came into the world, and God, brought hope 2,000 years ago, and God continues to bring hope even into the darkest of situations. And then like Isaiah says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And sometimes the darkest situations, that's where the light shines the brightest. That's right.
For sure.
So,
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Farrell.
Yeah, that was great.